Um, my name is Sasha, and I'm one of the co-leaders of the Current Events Club. Thank you guys for coming, and we hope you enjoyed the movie. Before we start, we just want to thank POWER, which is the People on Women's Equity and Rights, Columbia's intersectional feminism club, and who helped put this on. We're also with the Current Events Club, where we learn, discuss, and debate current events. This event is sponsored by the Maplewood Division of Arts and Culture, the Maplewood Department of Community Services, and Soma Film Fest. And they really helped us out, specifically Lisa Maynardi and Anna de Archuleta. Thank you guys so much. So we're gonna ask that you guys put your pronouns in your Zoom name and make sure to stay muted unless you're talking. As the movie did, we're gonna be discussing some issues of violence and sexual violence, so just be aware of that. I found this movie really interesting, and I hope you all did too. And we just want to make it clear that you should feel free to share your criticisms as well as like other thoughts. So, yeah, Maya.
Hello, everyone. I'm Maya Curran, and my pronouns are she, her. I would also like to say thank you guys all so much for joining the Current Events Club's discussion about She's Beautiful When She's Angry. She's Beautiful When She's Angry is a documentary by filmmaker Mary Dorr, and it was released in 2014. The documentary outlines the major events and organizations that are responsible for the start of the women's liberation movement, which began in the 1960s. So we wanted to take a quick minute to address the discussions regarding sexual assault that have been circulating MAPSO recently. We believe that these discussions are incredibly important to be having. However, we wanted to make it clear that tonight our discussion is mainly regarding the lessons learned and thoughts provoked by the documentary. So with that being said, I can pass it on to Maddie.
Hi guys. My name is Maddie, and I'm gonna she, her. I also just want to say thank you for participating in the movie showing discussion. And I start off the conversation by asking you all what your favorite part of the movie was and what the most part of it was in your opinion. Okay, can you hear me now? Or yeah? Okay, sorry, that's my bad. But my name is Maddie, my pronouns are she, her. I also wanted to say thank you for participating in the movie showing discussion. And I'm gonna start the conversation off by asking you all what your favorite part of the movie was or what the most influential part you felt was.
Yeah, I just wanna jump in really quickly. This is live on YouTube, but don't let that stop you from turning on your cameras so we can see your beautiful faces. Okay, let's begin.
My favorite part of the movie, we haven't watched the whole thing because we kind of started late, but I really liked the Lavender Menace part when they were talking about kind of women's gay rights, like as another sector of the women's liberation movement. I thought it was so powerful, and it just really kind of moved me.
Yeah, it's definitely really interesting to see how intersectionality plays a big part of this. I know that Maya, Maddie, and I, when we were talking about what we should really be focusing on in this discussion, kept coming back to intersectionality as this like key part. And they don't show all of it in the movie, which I think is a major criticism of it, but just to see how like different, like other marginalized groups like existed within the movement and were shoved out of the movement, and just how we can see that today even, and just yeah, it's really important.
I absolutely agree. And even kind of how the documentary reflected that marginalization. We didn't really get to hear from that many women of color that were huge activists at the time. We didn't hear anything about trans women's rights. We didn't hear about women in lower classes' rights. And that was definitely reflected in the choices of the documentary, which is definitely not a great thing. But something kind of a different theme that I thought was very surprising was how little the women knew about their reproductive health, about their nutrition or the amount of exercise they should be getting for their actual reproductive health or their how pregnancy works, how menopause works, how periods in general work. I thought that that was very surprising, even that now we can just kind of Google any question that we have. It's definitely a big shift.
Yeah, for me, one of the most influential parts was like when they all burned their not their diplomas, their university degrees. When they all burned their university degrees, that was really influential because I just thought, I was like, wow, that's like crazy. Like people like frame those and they take such pride in their degrees. And these women, they like didn't learn anything about themselves throughout their whole education, and just taking that step, I thought that was really important, and just like, wow, yeah.
I really like the part where it like shifted to like more recent feminist movements, and there was a shot of like an older woman like being really excited about it. And I think it's like it's nice to see, because I think a lot of times when like a reemergence of a movement happens, people outside of the movement try to say that like past movements, what they were advocating for was reasonable, but like the modern movements are asking for too much. And I think that's bullshit. And I also think that like, for example, like saying, I think there was like a male reporter in it who was saying like it was stupid that they were asking for more when they had already been given the right to vote however many years earlier. And I think like that it's important to recognize that like just be like things become more specific, and like as movements happen like during more recent times, but that doesn't mean that like they're any less valid.
Does anyone else want to share any other aspects or themes that they were surprised by or found interesting?
Okay, can you hear me now? Yes. What I thought was something that was really interesting and just kind of cool, not cool, I guess, but interesting to think about from kind of some of the opening monologues that stuck with me through the rest of the documentary, was how during some of the initial interviews they were talking about how people today can't quite imagine what life was like back then, because we've always had, even though movements have faced immense amount of troubles and conflicts and just fighting such an uphill battle, the movements have still been there for all of our lives. But for them, like, there was just nothing. There was no consideration of a movement for women's rights or empowerments whatsoever. And I thought that was just so so scary to think about. Just the idea that like there was nothing for an insanely extended period of time. And that was interesting to contrast with the rapid development that followed immediately after.
Absolutely. They were definitely making it up on the fly. And I like that they focused on the fact that that had consequences, and that could so quickly turn the ideas of the movement downhill. And yeah, I thought that was definitely an interesting theme.
Yeah, and that actually struck me a lot too. I actually made my mom like pause it when it was talking about that part, because I was thinking like, imagine like living that life and realizing like all of these problems, like they're just my problems. They only happen to me. And then these like all of this activism starts, and you realize, no, every woman is having the same problems. This isn't a problem with me. This isn't a problem with my husband, with my life. This is a systemic problem, which like, just like I like imagining like the like feeling justified in their feelings. That must have felt so good.
Yeah, so that definitely ties into the theme of the personal as political, which I don't know if anyone really remembers that from the documentary, but that's basically about how most of the interactions between men and women are political. And when you recognize it on your own, you may think, oh, this is just me. Oh, this is just my opinion. But when you start to hear it from other people and you have a group of people that all have felt the same thing, it does start to become a movement, and there starts to become a basis of morals. I don't know, it definitely starts to have some work behind it, that you want to spread your ideologies past that point. And that definitely allowed them, it allowed the movement to begin, and it allowed people to share their voice. And it can even, it's kind of a timeless idea. It can be related so intensely to now, and social media, for example, how we can so easily, from the comfort of our own home, have this impactful voice and share our ideas with thousands of people just using a little piece of technology.
Yeah, this idea of the personal being political is so true. And you can see without like throughout so many different marginalized groups. I mean, hair is politicized, clothes are politicized, like bodily autonomy is politicized. Like, it's just like so interesting, crazy.
I was gonna say, like, I thought it was so interesting, like, not interesting, more just like applaudable, I guess, how hard they all worked. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Sorry.
there was like all this work that was going into these movements, and like they just were tireless. And like, I thought something that was really cool to me was the poetry aspect of it. And when they were reading the poetry out loud, it just really struck me then, because it was kind of put into a language I could better understand. And I don't know, it just like through song and music and like all of these things, they were able to like get that message across. And it just like, I don't know, it was cool.
Yeah, definitely. And like I think that's another really just like interesting thing about this whole movement, is that a lot of the early progress that was made through like art and poetry and all these other like creative forms of media. And I think that was really just because it was like a way that people could understand each other without having to like talk about it. Like I didn't like they obviously they were talking about it, but like it was just like forms of expression that they were able to use without. Wait, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. But they were just, yeah. So do you guys have any, okay, can you hear me now? No, you can't. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. Okay. But yeah, so do you guys think that there were any like important reasons why all these creative forms of media were so beneficial in spreading the awareness about the women's liberation movement?
I just think like at the time in the 70s, that culture was very like prominent, especially in San Francisco. So I think just the use of art to really spread this message of liberation, it was kind of like almost like, because they were talking about the beat, like, I don't know, the movement, the beats, that group of writers. And like, it was kind of just another avenue for the like movement. So I think just the cultural awareness was really what propelled it.
I think also like because the current mediums like of culture were part of the reason that like sexism was being perpetuated in society, like it was important to battle that cultural form with their own sort of cultural influence.
It's also definitely a way to voice your opinion that, as Maddie said, isn't speaking. That's a way that if you've never been able to, if never before we've been talking about topics like this and you don't exactly know how to word it, you can definitely communicate your emotions about that topic through your poetry or your writing or your physical art.
Okay, I'm gonna shift the topic of conversation a little bit. So at the beginning, we were kind of talking about intersectionality and like how it affects these branches of the movement and just like, you know, how it is. And so you also probably in the movie, there was a lot about Betty Friedan, who was like this major, major figure at the time, like major leader of the 60s and the 70s women's rights movement. She was a founding member of NOW, which is the National Organization for Women. And now, I mean, like she was so well regarded within feminist circles. And now looking back on it, like all of her rhetoric around like the Lavender Menace, which was then co-opted into like an activisty slogan, but she originally used it as an insult. And her whole thing was that we shouldn't include gay women because like us, like we already have such a hard time getting rights. We can't include like this whole other subset of women. Like it's just going to be so much harder. Like just kind of like be quiet about it. Like let's stop. You don't need to flaunt it. And so this woman who did all of these amazing things also has this past where she was like homophobic, where she had all these ideas that were terrible. And so I just wanted to ask you guys, like, so, I mean, we see that within so many historians, right? Like all of our presidents. I mean, not that they all did good things, but like we just see all these people that were once so regarded and now we're like, well, actually they've done some terrible things. So I just wanted to see like what you guys thought about like respecting her while also criticizing her, and also the same for so many other.
No, yeah, I think that was definitely a good point. And like you can connect it back to the earlier like movement for women's rights in terms of like the suffragettes. Like you can look at how a lot of them didn't think that the fight for the vote should include Black women as well, because it would just be like too hard. And even like if you look at some abolitionists, like Frederick Douglass didn't believe Black women should get the vote and that you should just focus on Black men. So you can see like a lot of these movements over time like didn't fully include everyone. And I think it's just interesting to analyze how that has like changed over time and stuff. I don't know.
Another like good example of that is how there was a part in the documentary where I forget what her name was, but she was like, they were at this war protest for the Vietnam War, and she was standing up on the stage, and all these men just started booing her and catcalling her and whistling at her. And it's like, these are men who are supposed to be on the progressive side of history, you know what I mean? Like they're like part of these movements, but they're still not accepting. It's because these systemic beliefs are built so heavily into our systems and we're conditioned from such a young age. And it's like, even as an accepting human being, like there's still biases that we all have. And like to be a really like active member of society and an active member of progressive movements, you have to really examine yourself first before you can go and say things about other topics, you know what I mean? Like you have to take a look at your biases. And I think maybe a lot at the time, a lot of people didn't understand that. They didn't understand that they could have biases against other minorities. And I don't know, it's interesting to see how people thought that like gay women should just stay quiet because it was going to be too hard for the movement to sustain. And I just thought it was great how that group of gay women just came back and were like, no, we're not standing for this. We're going to have our movement and like have our liberation as well.
I think it also gives an insight into how desperate the fight was at this time. The idea that these people fighting for just some basic rights for women to have jobs, you know, to vote, to be autonomous from men, to not just be regarded as property for men. The idea that were they to be asked just to include gay women, that's all that they would need to do. But the fact that they believed and that would fully jeopardize their operation I think that gives more of an insight into just how dire the situation was. That just such a simple act that is just an act of pure good and inclusiveness would risk it all.
Like, excuse me. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, I somewhat agree with that, but I also think that I'm not like, I don't know, just a different viewpoint would be that like I don't know if back in that time period it was just like would be like a small act because like obviously it was like looked at as a bigger deal back then. That's all.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But like I just meant it as what we now regard as would be a small act, in contemporary small act, just to include gay women. Back then, everything was so just starting from nothing, so foundational that what we're considering just such a small, simple, natural thing would mean the end of it all.
Yeah, and I mean, we see that with like as far as people stray from white cis straight men at Christian also, like each like thing strayed from that is just like already, so I see what you mean, like it's already a big step, but it's kind of like a paradox because if these movements had come together, right, if like all of these like civil rights movements of the time and these women liberation movements and these queer movements and these like everything had all come together, like that is like the power of the people, right? Like that could have made change, like intersectional significant change that like we can actually see today. I mean, not that we don't see so much change today, but like it's really like the systems of power don't even want us to be able to interact because that's how we're actually going to achieve liberation. That's how actual change is going to come. Yeah, Kate.
Sorry, I have a really bad habit of like raising my hand in these things because I don't know how to like do a Zoom call. But did I forget what I was gonna say? Okay, someone else go. I forgot what I was gonna say.
I really agree with what Sasha just said, and I was thinking about how like it's interesting that like including certain intersections might like seem like dangerous to a movement, but it really like because they're all connected, like I feel like it only serves to empower the cause because like when like one group is liberated, it liberates universally, I feel like.
Sorry, going back to what Sasha was saying, like the idea that kind of society and the bigger powers that are kind of keeping us in our places or whatever, that they don't want us all to unite like that, like that's just another example of how systemic all of these problems are and how built into our society they are. Like it starts like right when we get out of the, no, not right when we get out of the like womb, but you know, like it starts very early on. Yeah. And like we're just conditioned to believe all these things that we like, why is that true? You know what I mean? Like why is one person better than another person? Why is the gold standard a white cis man? You know, like, and you grow up and you meet these people, you meet wonderful people who will tell you new things and new ideas, and you experiment with your own identity and your own life. And like all of these, like even not just the women's movement, like other movements you can be a part of, like the civil rights movement or the queer movement, like all of these things, like it's just such a challenge to that like patriarchal, like racist, homophobic, transphobic, just like omniscient power that we can't really give a name to because it's just society. Like, I don't know. I forgot what I was going to end with, but like that's.
I also feel like this whole conversation just goes to the idea of like wanting like power versus wanting something else in terms of like what the end goal of it is. Because if you want like power over other people and you want to like be at the top of that hierarchy and like be where men are now, like that's not necessarily a good thing because men have like too much power, I feel like, and just like, you know, straight white, like whatever it is. And so I feel like that's kind of another way that like these groups got pitted against each other, was like, oh, like if I want to get to the top, like I have to push other people down. And so if I'm a woman, like I'm going to push all the other groups down because I just want to be at the top and like do whatever I can to get there. And so I feel like that's part of it, instead of us all just being like, let's not have a hierarchy at all. It's like, I want to be at the top of it.
And they were talking about that, like about in the women's movement, how there was kind of this idea that they didn't want there to be a hierarchy. And then eventually some of that did take place where there were people who were, as they said, like listened to more. And I just think like that's an example of how, like, I don't know, just in our everyday lives, there's this struggle for power, this weird power dynamic in everything we do. You know what I mean? Like someone always has to have control. And why is that? Like, why does someone always have to be in control of the situation? Why can't we just like be between 2-3 people, like however many people it is? Like there always has to be some sort of person in control. And that kind of affects all parts of our lives, you know what I mean?
Okay, this is kind of taking like a different, that was a really interesting conversation, but I was just thinking about like, in terms of women's liberation now, like thinking about how in the movie they were talking about how like there were specific goals that they focused on, like they specifically focused on learning about women's reproductive health and gaining access to birth control and abortions and things like that. So like, just in terms of the movement currently, like, do you think that like there's kind of a lull in that movement and we're not seeing as much change as we should be because we don't have specific goals to focus on and like move towards to? Or are there goals that like you guys think are prominent? I don't know.
I mean, I think that the idea that sometimes it's like halting when like there isn't something to move forward like towards is definitely like true. Like the idea that like you can build up so much anger and like emotion over something that you feel is unjust, yet if you don't have a plan at some point you just feel like you're hitting a wall. So I kind of feel like that's pretty apparent in a lot of things today. Or I think, I don't know, that's all.
Yeah, going off of what Mila's saying, like I feel a lot of the time with movements like this, it kind of fizzles out after a while. Like I felt especially about that way about the gun control movement. Like that felt really strong in the beginning and then it just kind of like went away. I mean, I don't really know where that came from, but it does seem to be like there does become lulls in the movement and kind of like an up and down sort of roller coaster like graph, you could say. But I think in the end, like when there's problems that like need solving, like there's going to be people who are going to organize and protest and do things to address these problems. I think if there's a lull, it'll come back at some point. You know what I mean?
I agree with that.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I also do feel like there is a little bit of a lull just because I feel like some of the issues that they addressed, like male birth control or knowing the side effects of birth control, we definitely know a lot more of the side effects. I mean, if you've ever actually seen a like birth control pamphlet, it's like gigantic, but we still don't exactly know all of the side effects of what you can do and what you can't do with certain birth controls. There's barely been any change for any type of male birth control pill. There's definitely been improvement, but I think even some of the things that were addressed are still issues being addressed today.
Yeah, like during the whole second wave of feminism, one of the things that they like primarily focused on in the beginnings was the fight for equal pay. And like although it did improve like a lot, we're still fighting for that. Like women still do not get paid the same. And that's just when we like protest for women's rights and all these things, I feel like a lot of the time we are generalizing. So like things like that might be harder to accomplish just because we're not having any specific goals.
This is pretty much related, but in terms of like the equal pay thing, I feel like there's so much misconception around the equal pay thing because like if like thinking about it in one sense, like okay, like women get paid less cents to men, like that like in some people could think like, oh, that doesn't actually mean that much, but because we live in this capitalist society where money is power, it's not just being like, oh well, you get paid 70 cents to the dollar or 60 cents to the dollar or whatever. It's literally like we are giving you less power, we are giving you less money, less autonomy to do what you want. Okay, so that was just a little thing, but then the other thing I want to say was in terms of like creating change and like seeing this movie and how they're literally fighting the same issues that we are fighting, like all of these Instagram infographics that are being posted, like they were fighting this too. Women were getting raped back then too. They've been getting raped since for all of history. I mean, like, and it's just like also during the 60s and 70s, like this wave of feminism, there was a lot of pressure around the Equal Rights Amendment. So like Gloria Steinem, like all of these big names that you've heard, like they were really pushing for the Equal Rights Amendment. It was this huge movement, which the movie didn't really touch on, but they did have some of the leaders. It had Gloria Steinem in like one clip, I think. And the Equal Rights Amendment was never passed. We do not have an Equal Rights Amendment in this country. They were fighting so hard and fighting their whole lives for an Equal Rights Amendment that we literally do not have. Still, like right now, we're trying to get 3/4 of states to ratify. Like it's just newly being put up in Congress. Like it's just crazy to see. Like wow, like we've changed so much, but we should have changed so much more.
I think like that's also why it's so important to have discussions like this, like really taking the time to educate ourselves about these topics and really learn from that, because there is so much more that we can be doing as like just citizens of the US. Like there's so much more that we can accomplish in our time. Like we're still young, you know what I mean? We have so much time left to do stuff. And I think it's really important that we're having these conversations. So thanks for hosting this.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think exactly how the documentary said that like our conversations are about the most dangerous thing that women in the women's liberation movement were doing, and that it wasn't an incredibly violent movement. It was really the power of your words and your understanding of women and what women really want in the political and economic change and social shift that women wanted. Yeah.
And within this, actually, someone else can talk. I'll go in a minute.
Okay, I'll bring up a topic that they went on briefly, but I thought was really important and something I'd really never heard about before, or I just never heard the idea kind of come up. But when they were talking about the actual term feminism, they were discussing that it may not be as intersectional as they wanted the women's liberation movement to be. And they really urged the importance. I mean, if you can remember from the start of it, they were talking about how the movement came out of like the anti-war movement. It came out of multiple different movements that were not just about women or feminine people. And they thought that that might be kind of discriminating against large marginalized groups that were part of the same movement. So what do you guys think about that? Do you think it's not intersectional enough?
I agree with you. I think the whole concept of feminism like isn't intersectional enough. I don't know. I think it's good that it like to put a name to it, to the movement, but I think also that while people should be fighting for feminism, there's so many other issues that do need fighting for. And so I think like, well, you do have to get specific when you do protests and things like that. Like there's like, you definitely have to make time for each issue, because there is a lot of stuff going on right now, and there's been a lot of stuff going on forever. So like, I think feminism as an intersectional idea like is something I've never really thought about. And what feminism means to me is very complicated, just because based on like separate like identity issues. But like, I don't know, I think it would be really interesting to kind of try and transform it into something more intersectional and make it something that can be shared between communities. And I think that would make us a whole lot more powerful if we could go about doing that in some way.
Are you guys talking about like the word feminism or like the concept of feminism, like in terms of intersectionality?
Like, I think the concept and the ideologies that go
Yeah.
along with being a feminist.
Yeah, I agree with them that like a lot of people don't acknowledge that like different like races and like different people that identify as women, they have like different experiences, and a lot of people don't acknowledge it. So then when they talk about feminism, they try and like use it as an umbrella to cover everybody, but in reality that doesn't really work that way. And yeah, yeah, that's just what I wanted to say.
Facts, thanks. And I think that, I mean, the word feminism itself is so stigmatized, like it's literally ridiculous. We just associate feminism with like this crazy blue-haired feminist. You're opinionated, you're biased, you're annoying. We all know the stereotype, but really, I mean, if you think about it, the reason that it's so stigmatized is because women aren't supposed to be opinionated and women aren't supposed to be biased, and having opinions is masculine and being biased is masculine and holding power is masculine, and that's like what it's thought of. But in terms of so like the word feminism already has so much like baggage, almost like it's not like one specific definition, but then like within feminism it's so often being co-opted by cis straight white women, and like we see that within all of the mainstream feminist movements, like the Women's March being so problematic, like, you know, and like you're not a feminist if you don't support women with disabilities, women of color, fat women, old women, trans women, gay women, immigrant women, butch women. Like there are so many different identities, and like although obviously the mainstream movement has co-opted it into this like kind of white skinny cis straight woman who's also still beautiful and has long hair and whatever, has no hair on her body other than on her head and stuff. Like I feel like within like actual feminism, when you get into actually like women's liberation feminism, like you see all of these other identities that have to be represented, because liberation for the skinny white, like blonde, straight haired, hairless woman, whatever, is not feminist liberation. That's not what that is. You're not including any like of these other identities. And also climate change is a women's issue, because women and women of color specifically are the most affected by climate change. Climate change is literally like our world is dying, and we need women to help solve it. We need women to help fix it, and we need to educate women so that it doesn't, like before, like if we want to have the time to make any of this change, we need to work on climate change because it's impending doom. So yeah, that was a lot. So just
Could you like explain? I understand like how like climate change affects like a lot of lower class people, but can you explain like what you mean when it affects women like in general?
yeah, so I mean historically, like the term, okay, wait, there's a lot of things I want to say. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sorry,
Like
there's
so there.
Yeah,
around
back to it.
oh, can you guys hear?
Oh yeah.
Okay, like around the world, the roles that women hold globally, like in terms of like supporting households, the job that they have supporting their household, child rearing, collecting water, collecting fuel for households like wood, water, for all that type of stuff. Those are the roles, those are the household roles, those are the functions of society that are being most closely impacted by the effects of climate change. So like picture like, okay, like there was this in Chennai, India, there was like this like wetland ecosystem that was like basically being destroyed and flooded by rising sea levels. And that was like messing up. Women were in charge of trade at the markets, like basically ran all the markets to like support their households. And the like collapse of that wetland ecosystem like was affecting most directly these women, because these women are taking fish from the wetland, taking like product from the wetland and selling it to support their families. So suddenly the wetlands flooded, it's destroyed, that is impacting women. And like those cross sections happen like a million different ways. Yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Oh yeah. I was thinking more of like women in America and not like I wasn't really thinking of like around the world.
That's actually something really important too, because like even though you might feel like you can feel like a real distance between like you and like not you because you're not a woman, but like women in America and like women around the world like that have like collecting water jobs, the same systems of repression that are like putting women into these roles and making it so that they're more affected by climate change and by sexism overall are the same systems of oppression that are leading to the pay gap that we talked about. Like that's the pay gap in America, the like rape culture endemic that's like seeped into our everyday lives, the same system that's I mean, and anything, the gender
Everything.
disparity in DC, like between Congress people in DC, like it's all the same system of oppression. It's all the same patriarchal mechanisms that are making the market trading women in Chennai, India, like have trouble and people here. It's all the same. And there's like a real inherent connection that should be recognized.
So do you guys think that these connections between so many societal, universal, social, political, economic, whatever it be, problems that are related, should we go, this is more, I guess, like a theoretical question, but should we go ham at all of these topics and think about them all related all the time and try to come to decisions while always keeping them all interconnected? Or should we kind of separate them up a little bit, like how we would have something like feminism that maybe mainly relates to women and more feminine people? Or should they all be connected? What do you guys think?
I mean, I feel like there's no way to like not look at them as things that interact and like are related, because like if we're looking at people's individual experiences, like you can't just like take away like the Black part of a Black woman's identity, like, and then just like fix the woman part. Like that's not how it works. And so I feel like, and I also feel like it's just so not productive. Like so many of these things are connected and they all like stem from like similar sources of oppression. So I feel like there's no way to just be like, I feel like it's just so not productive to be like, okay, now we deal with this part when it's like all coming from the same thing and you could just tackle it at once. Thanks for the applause, Sasha.
I feel like that sort of connects to like what they were talking about in the documentary about how like it requires I think they said something like an ideological revolution to solve that, because sort of like it's there's value in like tackling specific issues one at a time, but like to really take down the entire system of oppression with all its intersections, it sort of takes a revolution of thought. And I guess it seems like it's really difficult to get there because like it's so hard to convince everyone that like everything of every part of society needs to be fixed.
Also, like, why would you leave someone behind if you could just bring everyone with you, you know? Like, that's what I'm thinking. Like, I don't know. Yeah.
Kind of switching gears a little bit, just kind of talking about the identity thing within the feminist movement. I just thought it was so cool, like all the little subgroups that they had, like that rock band from Chicago and the witch group. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, the witches were,
I just thought that
liked
was so
them.
cool.
Yeah.
Also, like the Jane abortion stuff, like that was just, I don't know, so cool to like hear them talk about it. And like just goes to like women supporting women. And like if no one else is gonna do it for us, like let's just do it together. I don't know. I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, and it was also cool how they like literally learned how to give abortions, and it was all illegal at the time. Like they
Yeah.
were risking like going to prison. It was just like so empowering to see that women like were capable of doing these things. And I think having those role models and having that kind of former movement to look to as kind of like, I think people trying to get involved in activism, like it's just so inspiring to see that people before us had the same kind of passion to inspire change and like help people, really, because that's what a lot of this was about, is about helping people.
Right. And I think that, I mean, we all hopefully saw all of this movie. And if you didn't, you really should by the end of the day, because we only have it on Vimeo for today. And it's literally so good. You just need to watch it. Anyways, so like we've all seen this movie, but I've never learned about this movement in any of my classes, right? I mean, we've learned about the suffragist movement of the 20s, which is a different wave of feminism, but like really not about this. And so it's like how like us seeing this and being inspired and seeing these, like both the duality of, oh my goodness, everything is so similar to now, what are we even going to do? But also like, wow, these women were fucking cool. Like they really did some cool shit. And like, this is so inspiring. This is so amazing. But like, who else is going to be watching this movie, right? Like, that's why, like, I feel like education, like that's how we can really use like social media as a platform for change instead of just being performative, because like it's just like we get to experience this super cool special thing that like ignites this flame, and we're like, wow, we need to do something about this, we need to talk about this, so let's actually do it. And like more people should watch this, more people should talk about this. You should talk about this like with your families, like that. The only, like, we all, like intersectionality, like we should all be coming together to learn about this because it's affecting all of us, no matter what your identity is. And yeah.
Yeah, Sasha, it's so interesting because like you look at how in that movie they focused on educating, and like they released that book that was like Our Bodies, Ourselves, or like whatever it was called, and like you saw how it sold like so many copies. It's translated into so many different languages because education is such an easy way to like education by women especially is yeah, Mila, it's totally power. Like, and we have such an easy opportunity, especially because of social media, to like continue that. And everyone always talks about like, you're so young, it's so hard to do things that like create actual change. But they were also talking about in the movie where like you don't have to be anyone specific. It is just like a random student and like a random woman who just like has a very normal life. Just when you're combined and you're all educated and you're working towards educating other people, you can create so much change with people who are just like very normal.
I want to say, like I've heard people talk like this. Someone was saying, not here, but another time I've heard people talk about how like awareness doesn't really do anything, which I completely disagree with. I think that spreading awareness and educating yourself from a young age is really, really important, as we're all talking about. I think it's so important, and you can learn so much and just help inspire other people and just like spread it more, which is really important.
Yeah, and I think the fact that like this part of the women's rights movement just isn't really talked about that much in school, or at least I haven't learned about it that much in school, and that can like lead to a lot of issues like repeating themselves. Like they mentioned in the documentary, like how we have taken such a huge step backward regarding women's reproductive health. And like I think part of that is because we didn't like really learn about it. Like we didn't learn about all these women that were dying from like doing illegal abortions and like all the troubles that people had to go through and all that stuff.
Sasha,
Yeah, and education doesn't even, I mean, like those, like what Violet was mentioning about the books that they were like talking about and all. Wait, am I frozen?
No, we can hear you.
Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Wait, can you hear me now?
We could hear you the entire time.
Oh. Okay. Sorry, guys. Okay, so I just wanted to say, like, education, obviously, like, in terms of, like, reading books and sharing, whatever, like, sharing writings and art and things like that is a form of education. But also another form of education is, like, talking and, like, passing these stories down. And then another form of education is what Kate was mentioning with the abortions, these women literally teaching each other how to perform abortions illegally, because they could not get anybody to perform an abortion and they needed to have an abortion. That's like a form of education. I mean, they had got 11,000 abortions done in 6 years. These women, like, they were determined. They were teaching each other because they had to, because they needed to have an abortion. And so they needed to teach each other. And so it's like, education is also reading and books and learning, but in another sense, it's it's trades. It's like doing what you have to do to survive and showing other people how they can survive as well. So I hope you guys heard me for that, but yeah.
Definitely. And also just going back to like posting on social media and spreading awareness about different movements and different ideas. It's like if there's going to be a shift in the media consumption of the American people or people around the world, if there's going to be a shift from reading all the time and even like watching the TV to a switch to going on your phone all the time, your iPad, going into social media, whatever it is, like then we have to bring that shift of different literature and of different art and different ways of spreading your voice and spreading awareness about different movements. We have to shift that onto different platforms to express what we want to get across. If there's book after book about women's reproductive health, about future steps for women's rights, then we need to continue doing that on different platforms that we can reach out to as many people or even more than those books did.
Yeah, because that's the thing, like, you don't get that kind of recognition if you just kind of, like, in this day and age, have that book on a shelf somewhere. Like, you need to spread it the way that kids are looking at information these days, which is on social media, which is on TikTok or whatever. Like, I don't know, I feel like just, never mind.
No, but even like taking a picture of that, of like a book that like is like taking a picture of a book that's about a different, like a social reform idea or a political idea, and just taking a picture and posting on your Instagram or making a TikTok saying, this is a basic synopsis of what this book is about, and you should read it because of this, that, and the third. And like, it's a way of spreading your word, like your voice that you never could before. It's incredibly important.
So besides simply educating yourself, what other things can we do to try and stop sexual assault and harassment?
Okay. I think that a big part of it is about like calling out casual sexism, calling out your friends. I mean, I'm sure you've seen that on like a million of the okay, whatever, I forgot that word. Like on Instagram and all this stuff, like call out your friends. But also I think it is really about like changing your mindset, because it's not just sexual assault and harassment. It's not. Feminism and like this oppression is not about sexual harassment. It's about sexual harassment and a million other things that so many people like.
It's about where sexual harassment's coming from, like the roots.
Yeah, it like the roots of oppression, and like intersectionality is like the most important thing in the entire world. And I feel like starting to like recognize that and talk about that is like how we're actually going to make significant change. But I do think, like what Maya was saying, while there is a really good side to social media, there's this also really terrible side where it's like, oh, well, I don't want to get canceled and I want to get off the hook for this, right? And like, that's why so many people do so many things, and it's really unfortunate and bad and really hard. But okay, one more thing. I'm the type of person that thinks that education is at the center of every issue. I think that the only way we're really going to be able to fix any issue of any marginalized community or any like systemic issue in the world, it's going to come first from educating yourself and educating others. And I think that like, because like in the same way that like class consciousness is a thing, like also like just like general oppression consciousness is how we're actually going to achieve liberation. But I think that the other thing I would recommend you to do, as like not a woman, for any of those people listening, as like for these men listening, is realize that all like your like the things that you face, being called gay, not being able to be feminine, that's also because of sexism and misogyny. Like the reason that you feel like you had to play a sport when you were a boy, when you were young, and you couldn't like do all these things, you couldn't be artistic. Yeah, you're suffering too. I mean, obviously it is in so much of a different way, and I don't really think that they're really equatable like on a scale, but like all of this stuff, like it affects you, and you should care about it because it affects us, but you should also care about it because you are suffering from it right now. So yeah, someone should add on to that if they think.
Yeah, one quick thing I was going to say about that was just like, but you definitely broadened it beyond even the point that I was making, that it's not just about sexual assault, it's just about how you perceive women and how you see their role in society and um, their role in their superiority or inferiority to you. And that exactly what Sasha was saying, that it's obviously all connected, and that being scared of being called gay and being scared of being feminine is similar to thinking that women are, it's all connected to the idea that women are inferior to you, and therefore you need to assert your dominance over them through some form of violence or something else. So it's really like taking a second to take a step back and digest the understanding that, just digest the whole understanding of how you see yourself in comparison to other people.
I feel like also something I've been noticing a lot, especially with online school, is just like, I think, and it all goes back to the idea of like thinking women are inferior, but just like thinking that like no women in your breakout room could possibly know the right answer, that like you could possibly be wrong and they could possibly be right. Like I feel like, I don't know, even just like the tone that some like men take, like it's just, I don't know, I feel like especially in like math class, sorry Archie's in my math class, not anymore, it's not you. But
I got kicked out.
you're one of the good ones, just kidding. No, you are. Anyway, can't win. But yeah, I don't know, I feel like it's just like noticing like little things like that just make it like that feel natural, because this is just like part of society. But then when you're a woman, it's like, yeah, that really sucks, like everyone just thinks I'm stupid.
Yeah, just to speak on that a little bit, having math with Lily, we'd get sent into this breakout room that was 8 dudes who spent a lot of their time arguing about their fantasy football drafts. And then they would also go over the work, and whenever Lily would try and speak up and like suggest an answer, suggest a way to solve the question, she would get just brushed off and ignored. And I think that's kind of, I don't know, it's not that it happened less in online school, but just the whole 8 dudes and Lily, yeah. But I think that there's definitely been a lot more exposed in online school, because as opposed to in-person school, when it's just like, you know, some people just speak up, but we're all sitting in a room, it's that you'll notice that it's only dudes turning on their camera and it's only dudes unmuting because they're the only person breaking the silence. And I have a question, because I don't really know myself, but you guys probably know the answer. In a town like Mapso that purports itself to be such a liberal, holy utopia bubble of just progressive and openness, where it but so clearly isn't, as you all know, and as we as men have had to learn, where does this dehumanization of women get taught from?
I think a lot of that is taught through experience. Like, when you're growing up as a woman or someone who is born female or just any type of person in that category, like I was catcalled for the first time when I was like 12, you know what I mean? I haven't had a lot of experience with this kind of stuff, and so I'm not going to try to speak on it too long, but I think a lot of that learning comes from the actual experiences that many young women have, and like just the exposure to that from such a young age, it's just built into your brain, and you just come to understand yourself as inferior. You know what I mean?
I know I want to say something before. So I this is kind of like tying into what's happening, but I have to like tell the whole story. So there was a kid I know, and he basically sent to he doesn't go to CHS, but he basically sent to the group chat of like a DM of him calling like his ex-girlfriend like a whore, all like terrible things. And I think like things like that, things like rape culture, things like calling women like names like that, like looking at them as sex objects, at least like the dehumanization of them, which can lead to and which can lead to like sexual assault and all the things that we've been hearing about recently.
I think to, oh, I was just gonna say with what Sasha said earlier about it connects to like I think what we were talking about like the hierarchy, and not just that like people like not on the top level, so to speak, of the hierarchy should be trying to get rid of the hierarchy instead of moving up it, but also that those on the top of the hierarchy aren't really there, because like even men, like even though they benefit more under the patriarchy, like they're still being hurt by the patriarchy and by like toxic masculinity, for example. So like it's also important for people to who do have the power to realize that like they would be better off if the power wasn't so much in their hands.
Yeah, and with power, like I forgot to mention this earlier, but like in my whole list of all these different women and stuff, like I also wanted to include poor women, because like class is like so unbelievably important in these discussions, and like another intersection. And then like that's how like this whole thing like is really like exists at the same time and is the same as like capitalism, right? This exists under capitalism because like with the pay gap, like we like money is power, and like power, like there's only a certain amount of power, and like the people that have it, and all that good stuff that I'm not going to get into because it's like a really whole other thing. But in answering the question that was asked a little while ago about like, so like what do we do, right? I feel like, how are we going to fix this? I think that's like a really like everyone's thinking that question all the time, right? Like, wow, these problems are crazy, this is crazy, how do we fix this? But I think that even like if you examine yourself, like that, thinking that this is a fixable issue so quickly also comes from a point of privilege. Because if you look at all these women and all of these people throughout like years and years and years who have been fighting and dying and getting like sick, and like look at like all these women that died from like these abortions like that they were talking about, like, and have been like protesting and getting beaten. I mean, not just within this women's liberation movement, within all of these movements, within like racial justice movements, queer justice movement, like all of these things and all this horrible treatment. Like, yeah, like we want it to be fixed too. We've been working on this forever. Like it's not going to come tomorrow. Like I want, like as much as we want this change to come tomorrow, like it's not going to. And like just like recognize that like your great grandmother was worrying about this issue. And like I feel like what's more important is focusing on your great granddaughter so she doesn't have to worry about this issue.
Also, just to like, yeah, that was really great, Sasha. Also, just to go to like Archie's question, and this was said in the chat, but I just wanted to bring it out of there, that I think so much of it comes from the media. Like just looking at like how women are portrayed in like TV and movie and ads, and like it's just crazy. Like there's so much messed up stuff there. And I think like no matter how, like even if you were to be raised in like perfect angel feminist town, like you're still being exposed to that, and like those messages are just so bad.
I also think like even it's also like not just like the media that we see from like the rest of the nation and the world, that it's also like basically the extent to which MAPSO is like liberal is the fact that MAPSO votes Democratic, and like there are a few like to some extent it's a little bit more like socially liberal, but like it's not as if like, oh, if we were an isolated community then we would all be like perfectly feminist, because like even within it's hardly, it has so much to like have to be done on that like case. So I think it a lot of it comes from national culture, but like it's not as if like we're so much different than that.
And okay, this is the last time I'm going to talk. Sorry, everybody. But the other thing that you guys all should, everybody, you all should do starting now. Hopefully you've been doing it before, but I'm not going to say like, oh, don't listen to like this artist, don't watch this movie, don't support this person, because like that's not really feasible, right? Like, okay, everyone's going to keep listening to Kanye West, like everyone's going to keep listening to like people that have like beaten and murdered people anyway, and like done all these horrible things and are transphobic, whatever. But it's really like, instead of saying like, oh, you have to cut yourself off from this, like I don't do that, and I don't think that anyone else should be expected to, but you need to be critical of the media you consume. When you're listening to music that's saying this bitch is gonna suck my dick, you need to think about that and like think about it in the topic of this. And like when you're watching that TV show where like I can't think of an example right now. When you're watching that TV show where like that thing happens, like you should be thinking about this and you should bring it up and you should be with your friends and you should be like, wow, maybe like this person is like this, yeah, conscious consumers. Yeah, like, wow, like this lyric is fucked up. This is messed up. This is supporting violence towards women. Like, you know, like it's not like you shouldn't ever listen to it. It's just that you need to think about it and talk about it. And yeah.
So does anyone else have any like last thoughts that you want to share? No? Okay. Well then I think, wait, yes?
Sorry. I just think maybe something's kind of interesting to point out is just like within this conversation, I feel like I was kind of able to like even more just like see how like everything is so intersectional, and like just the things that we were talking about and how everything just so like easily relates, like even with like the conscious consumer thing, how that like so easily relates to like climate change and all these other topics. And I just think that was really cool throughout the conversation. So thank you for that.
Yeah, okay. I lied when I said that was the last thing I was going to say. And also keep this conversation going and come to the power meeting if you're a student, which most of you are, except for my mom. Hi, Mom. Come to the power meeting on 2, but like that's not the end all be all. Like keep the conversation going. And also like I know this stuff is like really complicated, and I just want to say that you can always DM CHS Current Events or like my Instagram or maybe like the other co-leaders Instagrams, because like I've had like a pretty extensive feminist education, and like I would be happy to talk about it. And also come to the power meeting at 2. And also thank you so much, Lisa and Anna, for helping us with this and helping make this possible. And yeah, anyone can have any more thoughts, but that's all I'm gonna say.
Thank you.
All right, thanks guys.
Oh, are we heading out?